Hi, this is Padma Priya from Avinashalingam Deemed University. So today we can study on systematic desensitization, aversion therapy and flooding. Behavior therapists have a repertoire of interventions which they tailor to assist clients to attain their goals. Systematic desensitization, aversion therapy and flooding are the techniques used in behavioral therapy. These three techniques can help people learn to manage and reduce aggressive impulses, compulsive behaviors and anger outburst. It can help them improve their current coping skills or learn new ones so that they are more equipped to handle challenging or unfamiliar situations. The techniques and strategies used in these are also fairly straightforward and easy for most clients to understand and learn. This module discusses principles and strategies of systematic desensitization, aversion therapy and flooding. The application of these principles and strategies in assisting clients to replace maladaptive behaviors with adaptive behavior. The objectives formulated are to define terms specific to systematic desensitization, aversion therapy and flooding. Learn and apply principles, strategies of systematic desensitization, aversion therapy and flooding. Discuss the goals of systematic desensitization, aversion therapy and flooding approaches. Now let us discuss therapeutic intervention. Behavior therapists have a repertoire of interventions which they tailor to assist clients to attain their goals. Where possible, behavior therapists rely heavily on research findings concerning the effectiveness of an intervention when applied to a particular problem. In those cases where the empirical evidence is insufficiently clear or non-existent, therapists used clinical acumen and judgment within the framework of behavioral principles. The most used behavioral techniques are systematic desensitization, aversion therapy and flooding. So now let's study on the systematic desensitizations. Systematic desensitization is a type of behavioral therapy based on the principle of classical conditioning. It was developed by Wolff during 1950s. This therapy aims to remove the fear response of a phobia and substitute a relaxation response to the conditional stimulus, gradually using counter conditioning. Where behavioral assessment indicates that clients have certain specific anxiety or phobic areas rather than just general tensions, systematic desensitization may be the preferred intervention. However, adequate behavioral assessments are essential. There are numerous different theoretical explanations of the efficacy of systematic desensitization, some of which also have procedural implications. Wolff in 1950 was the originator of systematic desensitization, a treatment he considered to be based on the reciprocal inhibition principle described. He acknowledges that systematic desensitization may be conducted concurrently with other behavioral interventions, and it involves three elements: training and deep muscular relaxation, the construction of hierarchies of anxiety-evoking stimuli, and asking the client when relaxed to imagine items from the anxiety-evoking hierarchy. Training in relaxation. The acknowledged pioneer of relaxation training is Edmund Jacobson. The first and the second edition of whose major work, Progressive Relaxation, appeared in 1929 and 1938 respectively. The physical setting of therapist offices should be conducive to relaxation. This involves absence of disruptive noises, interior decorations that is restful, and lighting which may be dimmed. Clients may be taught to relax in a recliner chair or on a mattress, or at a very least in comfortable upright chairs with headrest. From the start, therapists can endeavor to see that clients view relaxation training as learning a coping skill which can be used in daily life rather than just treating them as passive persons. Furthermore, clients should be made to understand that success at learning relaxation requires practice and perseverance. Before starting relaxation, therapists can suggest that clients wear loose-fitting, comfortable clothing during the interview items such as glasses and shoes. Bernstein and Borowicki observe that in teaching muscular relaxation, there is a succession of events which must be observed with each muscle group. This tension relax cycle has 5 elements. Focus. Focusing attention on the specific muscle group. The second is tense. Tensing the muscle group. Third is hold. Maintaining the tension for 5 to 10 seconds. and the fourth is release, releasing the tension in the muscle group, and the fifth is relax, focusing attention on the letting go of tension and further relaxation of the muscle group. Having explained the basic tension relax cycle, therapists may be then demonstrate it by going through a cycle in relation to their own right hand and forearm, and at each stage asking their clients to do the same. For example, client is instructed to, I am focusing all my attentions on my right hand and forearm, and I would like you to do the same. Progresses to, I am clenching my right fist and tensing the muscles in my lower arm tensed. The final relaxation phase tends to last from 30 to 60 seconds. Frequently accompanied by therapist relaxation pattern about letting the tension go and acknowledging and experiencing feeling of deeper and deeper relaxation as they occur. Having been through the tension relax cycle once, especially in the initial sessions, the clients may be instructed to go through it again, thus tensing and relaxing each muscle grouping twice. Therapists are then likely to take clients through the muscle group, demonstrating them as there is sitting muscle group and suggest a tensing instruction. The arms tend to come at the beginning since they are easy to demonstrate. For most clients, relaxing part of the face is particularly important because the most marked anxiety inhibiting effects are usually obtained there. Once clients have learned how to tense the various muscle groups, they are instructed to keep their eyes closed during relaxation training and practice. Towards the end of relaxation sessions, we will discuss the client's issues that arise during the process of therapy. Terminating relaxation session may be achieved by therapists counting from 5 to 1, and when they get to 1, asking the clients to wake up pleasantly relaxed as though from a peaceful sleep. This termination session is also called as enjoyment period. Clients are likely to be given the homework assignments of practicing muscular relaxation for 1 to 15 minutes period in a day. Therapists should ask clients whether they anticipate any obstacles in practicing, such as finding a quiet place, and help them to devise strategies for ensuring good homework. Clients who do their relaxation practice are much more likely to continue doing it. And now the brief muscular relaxation procedures. When the full muscular relaxation procedures have been learned and the clients are able to attain deep relaxation, briefer muscular relaxation procedures may be introduced. The idea here is to learn attain deep relaxation with less time and effort. This skill may be useful both within and outside therapy sessions. Brief muscular relaxation procedures may involve sequential or simultaneous applications of the tension relax cycle to various muscle groups, albeit interrelated. Sequence of brief muscular relaxation procedures are one variations is to tense muscle groups. The right arm muscles, the left arm muscles, and the facial muscles are each tensed as single groups. The neck and throat muscles are tensed as previously, and the chest, shoulder and stomach muscles, the right leg and foot muscles, and the left leg and the foot muscles are each tensed as single groups. A 4 muscle group variations, which even more than the 7 group muscle variations, involve simultaneous as well as sequential relaxation group, that is arm muscles, face, neck and throat muscles, chest, shoulder and stomach muscles, and leg and foot muscles. Simultaneous muscular relaxation. Simultaneous muscular relaxation involves tensing virtually all muscles at once. An introductory therapy statement might be, when I give the signal, I would like you to close your eyes tightly. Take a deep breath and simultaneously clench your fist and flex your biceps from front very deeply and pull your shoulder blades together and tense your legs and feet. Now take a deep breath and tense everything. Hold for 5 seconds and now release and relax as quickly and deeply as you can. When ready, brief muscular relaxation procedures should be incorporated into client's relaxation homework. Mental relaxation. Mental relaxation is a part of systematic desensitization encouraged to engage in mental relaxation. Such relaxation usually involves imagining a peaceful scene, such as lying in a meadow on a nice warm summer's day, feeling a gentle breeze, watching the clouds. Therapists can discover which particular scenes clients find most conducive to relaxation. Frequently, mental relaxation is used after going through a muscular relaxation procedure. Relaxation training considerations. Behavior therapists differ in the number of sessions they take for relaxation training. Furthermore, clients differ in the speed with which they attain the capacity to relax. It is crucial to realize that the aim of relaxation is not muscle control, but emotional calmness. A 10-session relaxation training timetable with the first 3 sessions devoted to training in relaxing all muscle groups. Next 4 sessions to brief muscular relaxations, and the final 3 sessions to verbal relaxation procedures. Again, followed by daily homework practice is assigned. Therapists may vary the relaxation training timetable according to the client's need and their workload. Nevertheless, it is important that subjects have sufficient sessions to learn relaxation adequately. Constructing hierarchies. An anxiety hierarchy is a thematically related list of anxiety-evoking stimuli ranked according to the amount of anxiety they evoke. There are a number of considerations in constructing desensitization hierarchies. First, suitable themes have to be identified around which anxiety-evoking stimuli can be clustered. Needless to say, themes or areas which most debilitate clients' functioning receive precedence. Such themes are likely to emerge from behavioral assessments and may concern any one of a number of stimulus situations. For example, public speaking, examinations, eating in public, being with a member of opposite sex, and sexual intercourse. Second, clients can be introduced to the notions of a subjective scale of anxiety or fear. A common way of checking on the anxiety-evoking potential of hierarchy items is to say that 0 is a feeling of no anxiety at all and 100 is the maximum anxiety possible in relation to a particular theme. Thus, individual items can be rated according to their positions on this subjective unit of disturbance scale. Third, appropriate hierarchy items need to be generated around each theme. Since clients are going to be asked to imagine the items, the situations require specifically and graphically described. Therapists indicate the appropriate way for items to be formulated. Sources of hierarchy items may include data gathered in behavioral assessment, self-monitoring homework assignments, suggestions from therapists or clients, and questionnaire responses. Fourth, the items generated around a particular theme need to be ordered into a hierarchy. This involves rating the items on a subjective units of disturbance scale and ordering them accordingly. Some of this work may be done as homework assignments, but therapists will need to check any hierarchy before starting treatment. Also, during treatment, hierarchy items may need to be recorded or rewarded, or additional items introduced. Some therapists write or ask the clients to write items on index cards to facilitate ordering. In general, gaps of over 10 units on the subjective anxiety scale are to be avoided. Where such gaps occur, therapists and clients can generate one or more intervening items. Presenting hierarchy items. During desensitization sessions, therapists ask clients to imagine various scenes when relaxed. A basic assumption is that clients are capable of imagining scenes in such a way that they represent real-life situations. And it is therefore essential that one check whether a client can become anxious from an image even before considering these procedures. They suggest the client's imagined capacity should be tested by asking them, when not relaxed, to imagine situations which, on the basis of their assessment data, causes them anxiety in real life. Sometimes clients can be helped to imagine scenes by being asked to verbalize what they can see in the situation. Also, therapists may provide fuller verbal descriptions of scenes. A desensitization session may start with therapists verbally relaxing clients after therapists are assured that clients have attained states of deep relaxation. They may start presenting scenes along clients have attained states of deep relaxations. They may start presenting scenes along the lines of, now I want you to imagine that you are thinking about exams while revising at your desk 3 months before exams. Therapists start with the least anxiety-evoking scenes on hierarchy. So Wolf 1990 used to ask clients to raise their index fingers when the scene was clear. Then he would let the scene remain for 5 to 7 seconds and terminate by saying, stop the scene. Next, clients would report this subjective units of disturbance level. After 20 to 30 seconds, clients could be asked to imagine the same scene again. If this caused no anxiety, the therapist could withdraw the scene, possibly spend time further relaxing the client and move on to the next hierarchy items. In instances where the anxiety created by the presentation is no more than moderate, the therapist can repeat the presentation of the scheme, possibly encouraging the clients to relax more deeply before further presentation. Now we can discuss on the second behavioral techniques called flooding. Flooding might be described as a cold turkey extinction therapy. Unlike the gradual exposure paired with relaxation that constitute systematic desensitizations, here the procedure involves prolonged exposure to vivid representations of the stimuli that elicit fear, or to the actual fear producing stimuli in circumstances in which these stimuli cannot be avoided. Flooding is based on the extinction theory and preferably involves in vivo exposure to the feared stimuli where possible. As in systematic desensitizations, the techniques depends on the therapist first finding out exactly what it is that the client most fears. Flooding has proved to be particularly useful in the eliminations of obsessive compulsive rituals. Obsessive compulsive rituals usually have to be with one or two themes: contamination and checking. When the fear is contamination, flooding involves having clients actually contaminate themselves by touching and handling dirts and whatever substance they are trying to avoid, and preventing them from carrying out their anxiety elevating rituals, so that they will realize that what they fear actually poses no real threat. A variant of flooding is implosive therapy, which is also called as imaginal flooding, in which the feared stimuli, instead of being confronted, are merely imagined. First, as usual, the therapist obtains from the client a careful description of the fears in question. Then the client is asked to sit back and imagine highly vivid anxiety provoking scenes based on that description. Though the scenes are usually embellished in addition with painful details taken from the client's past history, with stimulus cues based on psychodynamic theory, and with whatever gruesome additions the therapist's imagination can provide. The following example of a scheme used in implosive therapy research with snake phobic. Imagine that the snakes are touching you, biting you, trying to get the helpless feeling like you can't win, and just give up and let them crawl all over you. Don't even fight them anymore. And now there is a big giant snake. It is a big ass man, and it is starting at you, and it is looking at you. It's ugly and it's black. It has got horrible eyes, long fangs, and it is coming towards you. Horrible, evil, ugly, slimly, and it's looking down to you, ready to strike at you. Repugnant has these sounds, it is often effective. Implosive therapy has not been evaluated as thoroughly as systematic desensitizations, but in a few comparative studies it proved approximately as successful as systematic desensitization in relieving snake phobias. And now let us discuss on aversion therapy. Aversion therapy involves modifying undesirable behavior by the old-fashioned method of punishments. Punishments may involve either the removal of desire reinforcers or the use of aversive stimuli, but the basic idea is to reduce the temptation value of stimuli that elicit undesirable behavior. The most commonly used aversive stimuli is electric shock, although drugs may also be used, as we will see. However, punishment is rarely employed as the sole method of treatment. Apparently, the first formal use of aversion therapy was made by Kontovich in 1930, who administered electric shocks to alcoholics in association with the sight, smell and taste of alcohol, an early version of anti-abuse drug treatment in use today. Since that time, aversion therapy has been used in treatment of a wide range of maladaptive behaviors, including smoking, drinking, overeating, drug dependence, gambling, sexual deviance, and bizarre psychotic behavior. As normally employed, it is a type R therapeutic procedure targeted at suppression of problematic responses. Because we have described the use of aversion therapy earlier in the course of our discussion of certain abnormal behavior patterns, we will restrict ourselves here to a review of a few brief examples and principles. The punishment by electric shock to be effective in extreme cases of severely disturbed autistic children. In one case, a 7-year-old autistic boy diagnosed as severely retarded had to be kept in restraints 24 hours a day because he would continually beat his head with his fist and bang it against the wall of a crib and inflicting serious injuries. Though it may seem paradoxical to employ punishment to reduce the frequency of self-destructive behaviors, electric shock following this behavior were nevertheless effective and bringing about complete inhibitions of the maladaptive behavior pattern in a relatively short time. Aversion therapy is primarily a way, often quite an effective one, of stopping maladaptive responses for a brief periods of time. With this interruption, an opportunity exists for substituting new behavior or for changing a lifestyle by encouraging more adaptive alternative patterns that will prove reinforcing in themselves. This point is particularly important because otherwise a client may simply refrain from maladaptive responses in unsafe therapy situations, where such behavior leads to immediate aversive results but kept making them in safe real life situations. where here is no fear of immediate discomfort. Also, there is a little likelihood that a previously gratifying but maladaptive behavior pattern will be permanently relinquished unless alternative forms of gratifications are learned during the aversion therapy. A therapist who believes it possible to take away something without giving something back is likely to be disappointed. This is an important point in regard to the treatment of addictions and paraphilias, one often not appreciated in otherwise well-designed treatment programs. So let us conclude the topic. Hope this module gave an insight into the principles and strategies of systematic desensitizations, aversion therapy and flooding, and the applications of these principles and strategies in assisting clients to replace maladaptive behaviors with adaptive behavior. Behavioral is a philosophical approach to life as well as a psychological discipline built on a precise scientific orients to the problems of man and to her living organism. Behaviorism represents reality and therefore views behavior that is outside of the expected social norms as maladaptive, not as a symptoms of disease, a form of deviance or deficit. These behavioral techniques have wide applications in clinical, therapeutic, organizational and personal development encompassing communications, management, personality, relationships and behavior.